Welcome into the Backroads Bill Podcast. I'm Ben, and this upcoming weekend is Thanksgiving. At least if you're watching this or listening to it when it first releases. And what that means for Thanksgiving is a lot of good times, a lot of good cheer, but also a brand new radio special that CBC Radio is putting on. It is really diving into some of the history of the railway and the impact that it's had on our nation as we do look back and we reflect, usually around this time of the year. And it's really cool because it's coming out actually Monday at 4 p.m. local time. And you can find it right on the CBC website. We'll put the link in the description as well. But today we were very pleased to have on one of the producers of this radio special, Melody Jacobson. So we get to talk to her about what kind of some of the background of what this radio special is all about, and a little bit of the background on what goes into creating a radio special, because there's a lot of people involved, a lot of work involved, and we get into some of the nitty-gritty about that. But first, we do need to thank today's lead sponsor, the North Bay Regional Health Center Foundation.
Dear North Bay, you've always been more than a place on the map. You're home to me. This is where I built a life with my husband, raised our kids, and taught in local schools for over 24 years. I'm proud to be part of this community. Earlier this year, my world shifted. After living with anxiety, depression, and PTSD for much of my life, I reached a point where I couldn't keep going alone. Walking into the emergency department at the North Bay Regional Health Center was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But what I found there changed everything. A nurse who made me feel safe, a crisis worker who truly listened. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. That care gave me hope, and it inspired me to give back by supporting local healthcare so that others in our community can access the same compassionate care I did. If my story resonates with you, I hope you'll consider supporting the NBRHC Foundation. Please visit nbrhcfoundation.ca or call 705-495-8125 to give. Because mental health is health. With gratitude, Tiffany Van Meer.
Today, we always have special episodes, but this is another one of those special episodes, about 100 and whatever we are now. We are pleased to have in Melody Jacobson, who is from the CBC. She is a current affairs producer coming to us bright and early in the morning from British Columbia. She's here to talk about the upcoming national radio special that is airing on CBC this upcoming Thanksgiving Monday. So this is coming out on October 8th. And that would be, I believe, the 13th or whatever that Monday is. If you're listening to this afterwards, it's already available. But it is coming out on Thanksgiving Monday at 4 p.m. called Track Records. Melody, welcome into the Backroads Bill Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Ben, I know you're special, but today Melody's more special. And then Track Records is even more special because it is a special on the CBC. And Track Records, Melody reached out to me and talked about the first bike, which we'll talk about. But Melody, how did Track Records start, and in your kind of interest in Railway Trilogy? Because this Railway Trilogy song, Gordon Lightfoot, right? Gordon Lightfoot is in the back of my mind now. And of course, that would be a perfect kind of segue to that question about your interest and how did it all start?
Yeah. Well, it's a long story. I'm going to try and keep it brief. But I think as a Canadian that's lived in a number of places across Canada, one of the through lines is always the railway tracks. I think when I look back, I've lived beside a railway track or near a railway track for all of my life. Toronto, Montreal, certainly on the prairies. I lived in Brandon, Manitoba, Calgary, and now here in Vancouver. And often, what the common experience that we all have as Canadians is sitting there and waiting for a train to go by, and you're, and I often, while it's going by, I'm thinking about where has it been, I'm curious about it. So, starting from that, I began to look at stories that really brought us together as Canadians. And I love Pierre Burton, and he has one of his brilliant special or books that he had. No, what? How many books did he have? He had.
The National Dream. We've all probably read it somewhere in our past, but I can still see it's on my bookshelf.
Yeah, it's a book. They turned it into a television series. It's very dramatic. I clipped a little bit of it for the special because I love how he sets it up, and how it all came together. So that's how it started. So I had another 1 hour special that was called All Aboard, and it was about looking at the railway now. It was how Canada came together, and it was even more salient these days now that there's so many tensions with the U.S. But the railway was actually built in a way to keep BC with Canada. It was the deal that made BC join the Federation. So things could have been a lot different if we didn't have the railway. With All Aboard, I started off with hearing more stories from the Chinese railroad workers, from immigrants who their very first experience was getting off the boat, getting on a train, and taking that mystery ride somewhere they'd never been before, seeing things they'd never seen before. And a little crumb of that story was that it was often the first time that these immigrants had seen Black people. And so because there were the sleeping car porters, Black Canadians who played a very special role in multiculturalism. So there were a number of stories like that I just could only skim the surface of in the first special that I wanted to go back to. And then that led to track records. So there's a segment on the sleeping car porters and other stories like that as well. So.
Yeah, no, we'll dive into that a little more because again, I from the overview you sent to us, the Black sleeping car porters were immigrants' first line of contact, and well, let's just dive into it right now. Like explain that part because I can remember them on the trains, in the white coats and that sharp billed hat, we'll call it, and that kind of thing. But maybe just tell us a story, one story from that segment.
So I spoke with Cecil Foster, and he came here as an immigrant himself, and he was a transportation reporter for the Globe and Mail. And he wanted to learn about the country, so of course he took the train. This was in the early 80s when you still had a passenger train service that was quite robust throughout Canada. And he was entranced by these other immigrants that were there that were basically wayfinders for Canadians. Since the time the railway began, up until the time when he was on the train, and they would know everything about the cities on the route. They would be able to tell tourists, they would be able to tell the immigrants, if we're going back in history, where to find things, where they could find where they could connect with their communities, their immigrant communities, where they could find books and that type of thing. But what wasn't known very much until he wrote his book was that they weren't able to join the regular union. So they had terrible working conditions. And so they created the very first union, and it was here in Canada, in Winnipeg, called the Order of the Sleeping Car Porters. And that was specifically for the Black sleeping car porters. And changed, it took years and years, but they did change the working conditions so that they could move around in different positions because they were regulated or they were restricted to only be porters. They couldn't be engineers. They couldn't maybe become management or anything like that. There was one level for them, and that was the level.
Interesting. I really love the term wayfinders because you found me at Backroads Bill, and you wanted to know about the first spike. But I can talk a little bit about. But you're fascinated, or how did you find about the first spike in Backroads Bill?
Well, it's a curiosity thing. I live here in BC. I am not too far away, actually, from where the last spike is for the railroad, and we've, as Pierre Burton glorified, made real to a lot of people. The last spike was, it has tourist centers. It has, all of the things that you would expect for a national monument. And so I found myself wondering, where was the first spike? And I thought that would be an easy answer, but it wasn't. When I did some research into it, I saw, I think it was like 2 separate claims in Ontario where they said, well, this was where the first spike was. And it wasn't clear to me from doing my Google research where it actually was. So my cousin is a librarian in North Bay, Judith Bowman. Hello,
What a
Judith.
connection.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Like, is it small world, eh, Bill? Like, what a connection.
Yeah.
It is a small world. And you know what? I'm also going to give a shout out to librarians. If you want to know anything, connect with a librarian because they will connect you. So we talked about it a little bit, and she said, I think it was near Bonfield, but who you have to talk to is Backroads Bill. And then they have access to all of these, the newspapers and stuff like that. And so she was sending me all of these links, all these things that you'd written, and I knew I had to speak with you about it. So
Yeah, well, I wrote about that in my first book, I think in 1999, Ben, and we're not going to give it away because it's going to be on the special on Monday, October the 13th, and Trackroads, you can wait for that. But I will just say a snippet. You're quite right. It was near Bonfield, the first spike, given a whole set of historic circumstances. It's really interesting. It's like the Enron affair in essence, and a lot of intrigue because the CPR was a syndicate, and it was how can we say there was a lot of I would say things that happened just because they really took the land, all land. And of course, you get into this, how they took the land from Indigenous people. And maybe that's our next segue into away from the first spike, which we'll hear about. But I think that's really, really important because they had a kind of carte blanche kind of just, they were building the national dream. They just took the land the right away.
Yeah. And, and I think as Canadians, we're all familiar with that when they were taking the land, they wanted to clear it. So one of the things that they did was they killed the buffalo, and just a mass slaughter of the buffalo, which of course a lot of the nations, the Indigenous nations, used for sustenance. It was their way of life for generations. But the other thing that they did is they just wholesale went in, claimed the land, bought it, made money, which we'll talk about. So I was really fascinated when, and this was my producer Missy Johnson and we were looking at. We wanted to look at northern railroads, and we came across the Chiwetan. This is North America's first Indigenous-owned railway. It's run by 3 nations, and we speak with the Chief Operations Officer, James Berube, and he told us about how it just made sense. They run from a place in northern Quebec up to Labrador, and the only way through for people is to either take a plane, which is expensive, or they had this passenger service, which was run by the coal mine that had closed down. So when the coal mine wanted to step away from running this railroads are expensive, the government was looking around, and then they approached the 3 nations and asked them if they would be willing to run it. And so they did get support, but what they did with that is incredible. There's, I believe, 80% of the employees are Indigenous. They run this railroad, which takes goods and it takes the people back and forth on, I think it's like, I don't know if it's daily, but it certainly is a regular route to back and forth. And, you know, life goes on and it thrives. And so there's a lot of takeaways from that. They're super proud of it and they should be. I really want to go someday and ride that railway that they have. But they're also visited by other nations now who want to do the same thing and revive passenger trains, particularly in the north, in Manitoba. And I think you know a little bit about one that's happening in Ontario.
Yeah, and of course, that's you hit on so many points. The one is that the railway to Churchill, which that was down for a couple of years because of washout, it's back in service. We've talked about on the Backroads Bill podcast the Bud car from Sudbury to White River. I've been on that actually 3 times in the last year. So my fascination with trains, and I'll go with you onto that train and from northern Quebec to Labrador to be sure. And I think this, and Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you, but you started off by saying, this whole metaphor of Canadian identity, one way or the other, I know will show up throughout the radio special. But again, and it's fascinating too, that we have railways. And again, as you said, we had a more robust, the word was used back in the, late 70s, 80s. But Ben.
So this track record's coming out Thanksgiving Monday, 4 p.m. Is there a significance to the release date of this? Is there any sort of thought process behind it, or did it just happen to fall on Thanksgiving?
It just happened to fall on Thanksgiving, I have to say. Although, our senior producer, Anna Lazowski, is a genius. And so she... I think she was trying to put it into either Thanksgiving or Christmas. We have a lot of CBC has a lot of holiday programming during Christmas, but yeah, it does land on Thanksgiving, and I think that's super appropriate because we're talking about all of the different cultures, the history of what makes us Canadian and where we're at now. And I think that's a really important point because I think we're learning more about our colonial past. There are certainly a lot of stories that are not, we can't be proud of as a nation, particularly the way that we were governed. But it was the governing at the time. This is not making excuses at all, but that's the thinking now is a lot more progressive. And I think we can hear more voices about what it is to be Canadian. And and I have to say that Track Records is, because I didn't have enough time in the first hour of all aboard, there are still so many stories to tell. So I'm hoping that Track Records, we get to experience a lot of different viewpoints about the railway and what it means to be Canadian, but that there are many more that we can tell.
North Bay's turning 100, and what a time to be here. From the buzz of the Heritage Parade to sunset concerts at the waterfront, the city is alive with celebration. And you know who's right in the middle of it all? Homewood Suites by Hilton North Bay. We're proud to be a part of this milestone moment. Whether you're coming home from a family reunion, planning a gathering with friends, or just simply making the most of everything the Centennial has to offer, our doors are open. Stay in a spacious suite that feels like home, with a full kitchen to cook in, room to relax, and a space to unwind after a full day of fun. Are you hosting something bigger? Our event spaces and amazing local partners like the Grand and Stock Transportation make it easy to bring people together. Best of all, they're just steps from the action. The fireworks, the food trucks, the music, the laughter, it's all right here. Celebrate 100 years of North Bay with us. Use code Centennial to save on your stay anytime this year. Be at home with Homewood Suites by Hilton North Bay. Join the party today at 495 Oak Street West or give us a call at 705-495-3000.
It's almost that time of year. Early mornings at the rink, fresh notebooks and backpacks, and a community gearing up for another great season of varsity sports. At Source for Sports North Bay, we're proud to be part of it all. Whether it's finding your kid's first pair of skates, gearing up for tryouts, or outfitting your team for the season ahead, we've got you covered. Because here, we're not just a sports store, we're neighbors, coaches, teammates, and fans. And we're proud to cheer you on every shift, step, and stride of the way. Visit Source for Sports North Bay at 1321 Fisher Street and let us help you along your way.
Yeah, like Gordon Lightfoot, I hope there's a trilogy after Track Records or another aspect. You can go on and on because, again, the railway is a Canadian identity. And I think we're reviving it a bit more, again, with these startup passenger trains and tourist attractions. Because, as we know, freight takes the right of way on the main lines. But people can see Canada from coast to coast to coast, in essence, but with some of these smaller regional rail lines. Ben?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously you just talking about the colonial past. Obviously, yesterday, so we're recording this on October 1st, but yesterday was Orange Shirt Day, of course, a big, we're constantly talking about all of the kind of past, like it's unfortunately exists, and you have to acknowledge it and learn how to move on. And we've talked about this a lot on our podcast. We talk to a lot of different Indigenous people and leaders and stories. And so we've talked a little bit about some of the Indigenous connections, but I guess I wanted to dive a little bit more into that, a little bit more into some of the. I know you said that there's that one rail line that's now run by Indigenous peoples, but I was just curious some of the more other connections, I would say, that this program has with Indigenous people?
That's a good question. I think that is the main one, but I do think one of the parallels, I think, to the Black sleeping car porters is how restricted employment was. So for a long time, Indigenous people weren't allowed to work on the railroads. And the railroads, that's a huge employer in Canada. CPs, Via Rail, that type of thing. So we also get into how there are so many more opportunities now for Indigenous people to work for the railroads, and Via Rail is actually going to the Chihuahuan Railway to ask them how they can get more people. So I think, circling back to truth and reconciliation, truth is knowing our past, and then the reconciliation is what do we do to make it better, and part of that is having more employment opportunities, more opportunities for entrepreneurs, that type of thing. I think that's the main takeaway. In the first, I'm going back to the All Aboard, there was a really great interview, if I can toot my own horn, to a PhD student. And he was talking about what happened to the cultures because with the railway going through, with our border being put through between U.S. and Canada, nations were split in two. And so that had a huge impact on their, cultural growth. Communities were split, families were split. So he is talking about how there's a huge revival now, and languages are being relearned, and cultural practices are being revived, and celebrated. I think a lot of the languages, a lot of the cultural practices were practiced in secret, and So now it's out in the open, and it's and people are being encouraged, and they're just celebrating their culture. And I think that's a really wonderful thing, that that reconciliation is part of reconciliation.
And it's so interesting about, talking about truth and reconciliation, talking about what you said about the fact that they weren't able to work on the rail lines when the rails are so important to these northern communities. And as you get north, especially in Ontario, I can't really speak too much for other provinces, but I'm assuming it's similar. But as you go more north and north and north, the Indigenous population, the percentage increases quite a bit. And it's so important to get to some of these rural places now, right? So I don't know about, has any of your programming, maybe not track records, but has any of your programming touched on, I would say, the importance of rail in some of these northern communities?
I think it's more research that I've done, background research, but certainly there is, it is, when we had the Greyhound, when it decided not to operate in Canada anymore, that's when we heard a lot of stories from people about how important it was to have this transportation infrastructure, and how trains have been, major sources for how people are able to get to see families, how they're able to get groceries, how they're able to go to celebrations and take part in their communities. Like there's also a lot of young people have to leave northern communities in order to go to school. And so the ability to, go back and have a life there where they can bring their skills and be in their communities is so important. So I think it's something that I'm certainly interested in covering more. But I think I would encourage other reporters to do that as well.
Yeah, there's in northeastern Ontario alone, I mentioned the Bud Car from Sudbury to White River. There's the Fall Colors train from the Sioux into the Agua Canyon, but now the First Nations are trying to resurrect that train that used to go for the Sioux to Hearst, called the Bear Train or the Muckwa Train. And of course, the famed, and we've talked about this on the Backroads Bill podcast, the Polar Bear Express that goes from Cochrane to Moosonee Moose Factory. A vital link. It's a vital link because winter roads are not lasting. So that train, until they create an all-season road, that train has been the lifeline for Moose Factory and Moosonee. But I want to segue to another. I know you'll talk about this on the radio special on the Cross Canada Transcontinental Rock Music Tour, and how important was that, and just a little bit about that, not to give it all away on track records.
Yeah. Now, this is one of those stories that I really wanted to get into in All Aboard, but just didn't have time. So it's a crazy Canadian story, and I love it. It was the year after Woodstock, and we had a concert promoter in Toronto, and he was backed by his friends who happened to be from the Eaton family, which we know of. And so they were the money guys, but they really wanted to stage. It was a cross between the Orient Express and Woodstock, and so they had a deal with CN to get a rail car. It was about 16 rail cars that they kitted out. And they had 2 dining cars. They were set up as jam spaces, so collective spaces. And then they got the creme de la creme of rock folk groups at the time. So they had the Grateful Dead, they had the band, they had Ian and Sylvia Tyson, they had Sha Na Na, for members of my generation and older will remember Sha Na Na. And then they had, other, and of course the band is Canadian American, but they had other, and Ian and Sylvia Tyson, very Canadian. So they put them all on this train, and the vision was they were going to start off in Montreal, and then they were going to go to Toronto, Winnipeg, Calgary, and land up in Vancouver. So they would have a big 2-day concert in each of these cities. Now, they had scheduled the very first concert was on June 24th, which, as we know in Quebec, is Saint Jean Baptiste Day. And so it was very popular among the kids. And Jean Drapeau was the mayor of Montreal, Montreal at the time. And he saw how popular this was. And he said, no, we have to cancel. So they canceled 2 weeks out because he didn't want the St. John Baptiste Day celebrations to be overshadowed by this huge hippie rock concert, right? So that was disappointing. So their very first concert was in Toronto. And it was what the promoters didn't quite realize or account for was there was a lot of political unrest in the 70s, starting in the 70s. And so the May 4th movement was a big factor in, it was about, the social injustices. So we have the Black Power movement. We have the American Indian movement. They were very upset about the war that was happening in Korea at the time. So these were all young people, and they were agitating. And this big rock concert is being staged in Toronto. And so we talked with Gary Crystal, who ended up founding the Vancouver Folk Music Festival. But he was one of the agitators. He was part of the May 4th movement in Toronto. So he brings us back to that time and why they were protesting. And this was the first big protest. And they were upset because of the ticket price, which was, I think, $17 or something like that for a 2-day pass. And they caused such a ruckus that cities across Canada became very worried about having this concert take place. So in Toronto, you have Jerry Garcia and Ian and Sylvia Tyson came and addressed these protesters, and they said, okay, we're going to have a free concert. And so they had a separate free concert. They kind of diffused the energy there, but the die had been cast. So every city that was going to take part in this became nervous. Vancouver canceled. Winnipeg was worried about it. It wasn't too big of a deal in Winnipeg. But Calgary was where the very last concert was held. And it had an impact on the musicians. So we talked with Sylvia Tyson, who was on the train, and she talks about the impact that the May 4th movement had and how she has a great story about how Janis Joplin handled some protesters in Calgary. And then we hear from a fan in Calgary who just loved Janis Joplin, and she went there, and she was 19 at the time, and just how magical it was for her. So you get the whole experience of what this was. But it was seen as a big financial disaster. They lost thousands and thousands of dollars, but it was a cultural moment in our history that maybe we didn't know about. So.
Henceforth, another train story, and of course, there's going to be many of them on Track Records. And this podcast, I think, will be October 8th as a precursor to Thanksgiving Monday, on October the 13th on the CBC. And again, go to CBC. Listen and look up radio specials if you can't find it for Track Records. And I really thank you, Melody, for being on the Backroads Bill podcast and highlighting this truly important railway thread that links us all together across Canada. And we look forward to the next special, the trilogy after Track Records. And All Aboard, look for All Aboard #1, Track Records #2, and we'll see about #3. Ben.
Yeah, thank you once again for coming on. I do have one last thing I wanted to get through, which was just some of the back end of it, right? So I told you before we started, like I have a radio background, And I know a lot of this stuff, but it is fascinating how some of these pieces come together. So maybe talk just a little bit about your role in putting this all together, and maybe the different pieces of how a program like this comes together in the back end.
Sure. I work as a current affairs producer, so I am mostly concentrated on what happens, on the every day for news and current affairs. And so radio specials are something that the CBC does, where you can spread your wings a little bit, dive into an issue and go, or a subject area, and really do a lot of research. And you get to be a little bit more creative in terms of using sound and that type of thing. So I had pitched this idea for a sequel to All Aboard a couple years ago. And then I was, you get busy. But finally the timing aligned. So I was able to take some time, and the story ideas, I'll use the Black sleeping car porters as an example. So I contacted a number of people. I looked at, I tried to get Suzette Mayer, who of course has the Sleeping Car Porter book that we know. And she wasn't available, but the person who researched all the research that she drew from Cecil Taylor, Cecil Foster, he was available. So I was able to book him, talk to him, and then it went from there. So so I worked as a producer and then I also worked as the host. And I worked with another producer, Missy Johnson. We did all of the research. We found the people that we wanted to talk to. We set up the recordings, and then with the guests. And then there was a lot of editing involved to produce it to be a 1-hour special. So we, senior producer Anna Lazowski also helped us as well, sort of put everything together. And it's a lot of work, but it's really a gift. I really enjoy doing them because, you get to be creative and you get to talk to people about things that they're passionate about as well. So you can really bring a whole community of passionate people together,
Awesome.
Which I like to do.
Well, if you want to hear Melody, you have the chance to do so on Thanksgiving Monday. Where will it be? After it goes live? Is it going to live on the website? Is it going to live on podcasting networks? How can people hear it?
Yeah, CBC Listen is the place to go to, and if you have the app for CBC Listen, you can search there, or you can do this on a website, and you just plug in radio specials, and all of the radio specials will come up. So track records will be up there pretty close to the broadcast date, and it will stay on that site for a while, so you can always go back and listen to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Melody Jacobson is a CBC current affairs producer from BC, talking about her upcoming radio special, Track Records. Melody, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, a big thank you to Melody for coming on the show. You can find the link to listen in the description. Of course, it'll be coming out on Thanksgiving Monday, this upcoming Monday. If you're listening to this when it first drops, 4 p.m. local time. If you missed it, you should be able to find it still on that same link that is in the description. And it should be a nice little addition to your Thanksgiving weekend. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find more episodes of the Backroads Bill Podcast on your favorite podcast player. We are on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, iHeart, all those places. The video version of this podcast is available on the North Bay Echo YouTube channel, and audio, video, and all other sorts of great things can be found on northbayecho.ca, where again, you can not just find the Backroads Bill podcast, but also other podcasts on our network, such as To North Bay with Love, Echo Essentials, and the Echo Sportscast, alongside a bunch of other really great other local podcasts. And of course, check out our newsletter, Echo Essentials, which curates all the stuff happening on in the network here, as well as some of the stuff going on in the North Bay area. So thank you for joining us for this episode, and we will see you again next Wednesday for another Backroads adventure.